But I think right now, like the word metaverse just upsets me at a very deep level. And I feel like a lot of the metaverse up until now has been built by trying to second guess what might have a gravity, or might be of interest. Where here we're really trying to solve concrete problems and taking these tools on the table and using them to do it.
Welcome back, dear listener, to Barriers to Entry. It is the podcast where every episode we get into it with the leaders, the designers, the early adopters, and the influencers who are driving innovation in the architecture and design industries. It's the metaverse, it's AI, it's blockchain, and it's all happening here, and it is the summer of BTE. I'm Andrew Lane. I am here, as always, with my tanned and relaxed co-hosts, Bobby and Tessa Bain, and Bobby's got a new haircut today.
It looks great.
Thank you. I've got a fresh haircut. I've got a lot of excitement just permeating through my body because, as we talked about last week, we're on the heels of the big Barriers to Entry reunion at the Perspectives Summit. Took place in New York City just 2 weeks ago. We actually got to hang out with this week's guest at Perspectives, Keith Fine. He took part in a panel, Andrew, that you happened to host. Maybe you can give the listeners a little taste of what the embedding innovation in your organization conversation felt like for people who weren't in the room.
I also want to give myself credit for curating the panel, Bobby.
Curator and host.
Yeah, I went through the roster of some BTE guests. We brought back our friends Matthias Holwisch and Aaron McDonald. We put them together with upcoming guest who you're about to listen to, Keith Fine. And we talked to the group about different strategies and approaches and ways of thinking about how you take innovation as a concept and embed it into your organization. And what we heard was from three different leaders who have three really different origin stories and have come to this from different places, but have all, arrived at a mindset within their organizations where they're really driving experimentation and helping their organizations to adopt new technologies, pushing the ways that they're doing business. It was an exciting conversation. And I got to be honest, I hope they're listening to this right now because we definitely threw a plug or two in for Barriers to Entry that day.
I like that you said origin stories. It almost feels like it's a natural segue into our conversation with Keith, who you and he had a lot to say about a certain movie franchise, which I've not seen before, Star Wars, but I'm sure a lot of our listeners have probably seen it in the past.
Tess, what's your favorite Star Wars memory?
Why are you asking me this? You know I've never watched Star Wars either.
Exactly. I just thought that it was important for our listeners to understand this was a me and Keith thing. Me and Keith definitely had a moment.
You're bros. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, me and Keith are kind of bros. But I think we all got along pretty well, and I think it was a pretty great chat. What do you guys say we dive in?
Let's do it.
Today on the pod, the summer of Barriers to Entry continues as we're live in New York at the Surround Podcast Compound at Penn 1 in Midtown Manhattan, and we're pleased to welcome a true innovator in the world of architecture. He is a partner and director of innovation at SLAM Collaborative and a member of the AIA Large Firm Roundtable and Design Futures Council. He's taken the lead on some very exciting work using 3D spatial tech and AI to redefine the way his firm is working. Welcome, Keith Fine.
Thanks so much. It's fantastic to be here.
You're a partner, but also an innovation lead at SLAM Collaborative. What was it that led you not only into architecture, but into a role where you're in charge of helping to drive the firm forward in new areas?
I think the first spark of creativity when it really hit me that I was going down this path, I was going to date myself a little bit here, but I was about 5 years old when Star Wars first came out, like the New Hope, like the real one.
No, yeah, you got to make sure which Star Wars.
Oh, yeah,
right? This isn't Jar Jar Binks.
Yeah, and being that this is like so embedded in my, my spark of creativity and my path, my life path, if you will, I'm very, very high bar in terms of my analysis of those movies, and we're not going to go down that rabbit hole today, obviously.
Is this where I reveal I've never seen Star Wars before?
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, all right, I'm getting a lot of looks.
Is it bad to end the podcast so quickly? But no, I think going in there, and I saw it 11 times in the theater, which is outrageous. But it just blew my mind. It was like so detailed. It was creating this incredibly rich world with laser guns and adventure and storytelling. And that I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to create and I want to storytell. And eventually I got into theater and started building spaces and that was a rush because you'd envision it, and then days later you literally inhabit it, and it kind of like that became the addiction, right? And then took an architecture class, and here I am.
How early into that journey into building did you start to look at yourself as an innovator, and did that mindset of innovation immediately tie into your passion for architecture, or was it around the time you were 5 years old? Did you also think about innovating in some other way?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. As an architect or a designer, I think the act of designing, in a sense, is innovating. Like you're creating something from scratch, from your imagination that's, better than what's there, the blank tapestry or what have you. And so, I just kind of went down that path and dug it.
I'm surprised you didn't ask who shot first, Bobby.
That's right over my head.
That honestly shouldn't even be a question. Like the fact that that's a question or a meme is so upsetting. But of course, Han Solo's part.
You heard it here.
Yeah.
I'll ask you who Han Solo is later. I know your first reactions to AR and VR weren't exactly positive, despite the fact that you are an innovator in your role at SLAM. Tell me about, why your initial reaction was skepticism, maybe on the positive end of the spectrum.
Yeah. Well, I definitely had a very profound experience, that sort of was a big pivot for me in terms of the technology. So we're working with a general contractor, and they had their head of VC, and he came up to me and said, hey, we just started playing with goggles and we've got all this software. We want to take your model of the building and we want to put it into VR and put the client in it. So that's a horrible idea. That's such a bad idea. We just permitted this, and we have like a multi-headed client where this one client you want to put in the headset's going to want to change everything. Mm-hmm. And this other client over here that holds our contract is going to have us in big trouble because we're going to miss our deadlines. Like, we need to hold the course. And then I started thinking about this. Like, I'm like, these bulky goggles, and there's all this setup, and there's probably a lot of behind the scenes work that we have to do on our side. Like, where's the value? Like, we're just going to spend, it's going to be a big money pit for us. And our client's going to think it's gimmicky and silly. And he kept on me. He just kept on me. And finally, I said to him, I said, listen, I have a meeting in your office, like next Tuesday or whatever. After that meeting, let me walk out of that, and I'll walk into your cubicle, have it set up and ready to go, and we'll do a test. I'll just walk into there. So I did that, walked in, got my, sour face on, trying to be nice. And I put these goggles on, and it was just a game changer for me. It was like, and I'm someone who inhabits models in 3D on my screen and rotates them around all the time. And I was able to really understand that space in a very different way. And it was fantastic. And so I think that didn't necessarily tie me to goggles moving forward, although I thought that was our path. We had another pivot down the line that helped us realize that the goggles might have been a bit of diversion or have a very specific space. But it really opened my eyes to using the gaming engine and overlaying that into the built space and inhabiting it, and then using that to make decisions. And so, so that's where skepticism really kind of pushed us.
Are you sympathetic to skeptics now, or are you frustrated by skeptics when you have to deal with them? Because I'm sure you deal with them all the time.
Yeah, no, I'd say it's both. Yeah. I think skepticism is such an important part of innovation because, and they cut the legs out from under you, they pull that carpet, and you're sitting here and you can see I'm a pretty, lively, passionate individual about what I'm doing. And I'm trying to sell people, and you get the skeptics in the room who are sitting there just throwing darts. But what I've learned is that you need to engage those people. I think the skeptics are the people that help you keep it real, keep you grounded. You need to, the better people who are designers or innovators are people who, they shrug off the hurt feelings and they sit down and they truly listen to, what was the feedback? Is this something that's going to, maybe help me in terms of selling this concept? Maybe they didn't understand what I was doing. Or maybe there's some components with a path I'm on that have some technical barriers that I need to overcome that I didn't realize. And so either way, you're getting really valuable feedback. So it's frustrating, but it's a frustration you have to absorb and embrace to move forward and excel. Right.
So you talked about kind of the different paths that you went down, and I love the story that you've told us before about where you sort of had a necessity that drove kind of the innovation path that you're on right now. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that moment and where that's taken you.
Yeah. So this is the other pivot, right, that we were talking about. And this is, again, we started a lot of this technology exploration in healthcare. So a lot of these stories are going to speak to that. And this was a very complicated, fast track procedure center, surgery center, and imaging center. It was all like a mini hospital with infusion for radiation oncology and cancer treatment. So there's a lot going on in this one building. And we had really started after that first, excitement about using that technology. We started getting a lot of more assets into the building, so we could, some of that we were able to kind of get from our client, others we had to build ourselves, and we made some investment there. But our goal was to get every single space, because we have to go and review every single room in the entire facility and get it built out with all the equipment and everything in their casework, yada, yada. And so we would then walk through the client in there. We were going to do a whole digital circus. It was going to be 3 separate monitors in a conference room. We had set 3 separate rounds of meetings that we were going to have. So we'd have a week of meetings, and the meetings are grueling 10 hours a day with clients that were cycling through for 18 departments, but we would be there 14 to 16 hours with commute. And then you'd have 2 weeks to get everything incorporated that they gave you as feedback, and then do it a couple more times. And so we wrote PR stuff to get the doctors to get their schedule set. And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks before this meeting, the first wave of COVID hits. Oh. And we get a call from the client. And the client's like, okay, I got a lot of news here. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. Honestly, most of it's bad. The good news is the doctors have committed to the times that we have. We said, great, because we know we're behind schedule. We really need to pull us together. He goes, well, the other news is that the conference rooms that we had reserved to be able to do it, that you planned everything around, well, that's full of beds right now for COVID patients, so we can't use that. And on top of that, like because of our policy and the dangers of COVID, we can't have any two people in the same room. Meanwhile, our entire staff is now their first week working out of their kitchens and dining rooms, and their internet's dropping, and it's like, so we're like, okay. And they said, okay, and one more little bit of bad news is the doctor said that this is likely the only time they'll be able to meet with us with this crisis going on. So you need to sign off the entire building in one round. Instead of 2.5 months of 3 separate rounds of meetings, you have to do it all at once. And so after I, got up off the floor and shook my head a couple times, we got the team together and we just worked the problem. I mean, we just got down and we developed like redundant roles. We developed this whole process. And this process is now like the cornerstone of how we're interfacing with our client and delivering work. And it was just profoundly impactful. And we were able to sign off 15 of those 18 departments in a single meeting. And that's when we kind of looked at each other and we're like, something's going on here. This is pretty cool.
Do you think that the urgency that the departments felt also, we talked in a past interview about the pandemic being a force for folks removing noise in decision making. And do you think that maybe your clients also recognized they needed to remove some noise in their decision making? Maybe you were helped a little bit in the fact that the doctors recognized we got to move fast also here.
Clearly the pandemic was a catalyst for a lot of things, and I can't put myself in their shoes relative to that.
Sure.
But we did a lot of work in terms of how we curate that model to keep the team focused, so we wouldn't have any extraneous distractions to keep them on par. And another thing about editing out that noise, I think that also is a really good statement relative to the technology that we were working with, is that where, previously we'd have dialogue with the client and these are doctors and practitioners and nurses and department heads, and they don't read plans. They do, every 3 years if they're redoing their department or something, and they get in there and you get really weird questions like, every architect's heard this, like, what's that table doing in the middle of the room? Do I have to walk around that? And you're like, that's the room tag. We weren't getting those questions. Like all that noise, to your point, was gone. And they were inhabiting the room. And instead, like a lot of times in these buildings, like there's a lot of stuff that gets put in at move-in, like degermers. Like we don't have time to deal with that during the design of the building. We'll just figure that out later on. We populated those in this model. And I remember turning at one point, we were in one of the rooms, and the practitioner turned and said, wait, turn back. Let's walk over there, because they're literally inhabiting the room.
Yeah.
Like, I need you to relocate those because you have like the light switch, and then you have the degermer, and then the gloves. And it's like, I need to move some of that order around based on the flow of the way when I'm leaving the room, entering the room. And I don't remember the exact comment, but it was like, they were seeing things in their environment because that was their natural way of inhabiting that space. And it really helped them transport into that space to drive decision-making in a very different way. And I think we were able to come out of that with a set of documentation that was just so much more accurate than we've ever put together before.
I think what's really cool is you obviously, you just gave an example there. You learn things in live time that maybe you weren't even expecting when you create an experience like this for the clients that you're working with. What are some of the other kind of unexpected things that you've learned and have become maybe even more core as you've evolved this approach moving forward?
Well, I mean, I've detached myself from the goggles. I think, and I didn't say detach, I have plans for the goggles because I think that...
Yeah, I can verify Keith does not have goggles attached to him. Very true.
I feel like goggles are a tool that are evolving that are going to have a specific place. Mm-hmm. And I think they are a profoundly powerful tool used properly. But I think right now, like, just the word metaverse just upsets me at a very deep level. And just so much of the pieces that have been built in there. I feel like ours, you keep coming back to this, how this was built by necessity. And I feel like a lot of the metaverse up until now has been built by trying to second guess what might have a gravity, or might be of interest. Where here we're really trying to solve concrete problems and taking these tools on the table and using them to do it. And it's a lot more powerful, I think.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot out there right now that's trying to just replicate the physical, and that's fine and nice, but I think people really see the promise of 3D spatial when you're trying to create something that's not possible, right? Like you've used it to create something that doesn't physically exist yet.
Yeah.
and I mean, allowing it to start to create efficiencies and change processes and change the way that people think and collaborate.
Yeah.
I think that is what the promise of this tech really is when you start to get it at a really tactile and tactical and useful level.
Yeah.
Where do you see the real potential for this starting to go, or what have been some of the big eye-opening moments that you've had with your clients as you've brought them into these experiences?
Well, I mean, we're seeing the process that we put together and the way we've structured it as a real differentiator. And we put a lot of work into making it efficient, because that's the challenge, right? Is how do you make this efficient? Because, we've talked to peers and such, and they really struggle with trying to develop this same workflow. And I feel like we were able to pull it off at our initial phase and be kind of in the black. We kind of we're neutral in terms of that, and that's how we market ourselves generally. But there's a lot of ad services that can go to it that can further enrich. But I think we're looking at big data, we're looking at AI, we're looking at being able to push this straight to fabrication. So I think this becomes a platform that's really going to change how we deliver buildings. I almost see the way that we're going to design, interact with our geometries, and proofread our geometries, and then move them through and validate them and get them produced is going to be more visually managed, it'll be in combination with technical drawings, but we're proofreading buildings with overlay of built space and looking at existing conditions as they're being built relative to our overlaid interiors and the infrastructure of the building, and validating that I was doing it in the goggles. So I'm seeing there's so much potential to this workflow. You're going to start being able to talk to your AI, and you'll be able to just give it, hey, take that cabinet and move it over here. And then you walk in through, turn off the sheetrock in the ceiling, and move that data port over. This thing is going to need power and data, and your electrician's going to go and drop it in the model while you're there. And its AI is going to connect it to the infrastructure, to the panels. We're on a path that's really outrageous. You can see it. It's tangible. It's like really thick fog, like cotton candy. You can just bite into. Yeah, right.
Well, you talked about the process of your clients adapting to the new technology that you're presenting them, but I'm curious about the process of what it's like onboarding your team internally to the new technology, and obviously very rapidly.
Absolutely. No, that's a really, really good point, because even as we present and we talk and we reiterate internally about how we're doing this, and we've developed a whole structure internally between different studios and innovative leaders within the team that are sharing resources and whatnot. But if you have the wrong person driving that model, they're in a closet there. Everyone knows the same pitfalls when you have more of that in the headset, right? And so, we have David in our office has created this driver's ed course that teaches you how to manage your camera. And we have a lot of discussions about how to curate your monitor and the different applications that are popping up and the extents of those, and what different softwares are going to be on the screen at the same time in pairs to be compared to each other. And, sometimes you'll spend an hour and a half just setting up for a meeting, just getting your screen and all your applications open and getting yourself ready to interface. So there's a lot of training that goes to that. And then, how you move your camera, how you keep your client from getting motion sickness, and, asking him to look away if you're speeding down a hall. There's so many subtle little things, but it starts to help you realize that you're like a tour guide. You're really curating an experience. And I think the next level of that too is starting to infuse a bit of branding to that as well. And so we're kind of exploring that too.
My mind is still blown by the challenge you faced right on the dawn of the pandemic, of trying to figure out how to pull together these meetings, what sounded like overnight. As you continue to embed innovation throughout your organization, what are the processes you undergo? You're leading that throughout the firm. Mm-hmm. And when you
and across multiple offices too.
And exactly, across multiple offices. So you talked about, training the team in the processes you've adopted already as a firm. But when you bring in new technology, when you bring in new innovation, I've been calling the virtual assistant you've been referring to as Keith in my mind. So at some point when we say, hey, Keith, move the table over here, how do you envision embedding these new processes, these new technologies into what already sounds like a pretty amazing differentiator for SLAM?
I love that. I think I'm going to have to make that my legacy in the firm, that if we do develop our own internal AI, that'll be called Keith. So 60 years from now.
Keith versus Siri.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So I think, well, first of all, I think as a clarification, I take my role of director differently. I'm not sitting up on high, coming up with the ideas and giving direction. I really see myself as a curator of the team, a support for the team, right? And I put a lot of dots together, but I spent a lot of time digging through the company just to try and find our best and brightest people. We also have a learning platform that we've created internally. Knowledge exchange is a huge part of the DNA of SLAM. It's like really a lot of what we're about. We're a very technically astute firm. We're a one firm mentality in terms of our culture, and we leverage the best people for the jobs most appropriately to really make sure we're giving the best product. And so with that, one on the major platform, it becomes a great like propaganda piece almost, where we curate great innovation or things that are going on, and we give these presentations twice a month to the entire office. And then from those, sometimes if it's a good technology, we have different like a tips and tricks. We'll do knowledge exchanges that spin off from that. But then we have little clusters of activity where if I get contacted by someone who's really into 3D printing, and so I call Leon in Orlando and I dig in and what's he doing? I encourage that, and we develop a little bit of a petri dish of classes that are going on there, and then we move that to the SLAM Talks platform, and then we make a knowledge exchange for that. On what we're doing with healthcare and rolling out this visualization into other market sectors now, we start with a base of the leading people in each of the studios to make sure we have representation, so we find what our best practices are and generalize those and document those. And then start, working with our Revit directors to kind of get asset correction curated. There's a lot of different facets to it, but it's just about spinning plates, engaging people, constantly hunting, digging into things, and understanding how they can go together and getting those people together to make them far better than you ever could yourself.
And now you have clients who seek you out specifically because of the way in which your firm approaches innovation.
Yeah, I think people, as we've been sharing the platform and the demo that we gave you here before, it generates a lot of excitement, a lot of interest, and especially in these technical spaces, because I think a lot of clients are recognizing that their biggest enemy is themselves sometimes, and that they continually change their mind, and they're realizing that, hey, if I can put these people, I have this one supreme user that's running, the surgery center, that they're going to, if they can understand it better, they won't make as many changes. It'll just like lock it down and they'll love it and move on. And so that's the hope, right?
Well, we know you can't talk about this in detail because of lawyers, but you're working with an AI company that's focused in the A&D space. How are you approaching the potential of that technology?
Yeah, well, it's a challenging one to navigate. It's an exciting space. It really starts to open your eyes in terms of where our industry is moving and how quickly it's moving. So what we've done is I've talked about some of these cluster groups, and we're developing a best practices workflow. And then from that, we've realized that we've already started to generate a lot of different assets. So we're then also defining what we're calling a forward-leaning workflow. So that's sort of like, okay, we need to get best practice, get everybody generalized, and then move us into this, finish building out these assets and tying them together so they work properly. And then at the same time, we're developing an aspirational workflow. So the goal is to move everybody to the forward-leaning and then start finding bridges to the aspirational, right? So those bridges can come from anywhere. We want to empower everybody to be searching and reporting back so we can talk about them. And so this engine, and working with we've been speaking with a couple different AI companies, is looking at walking through our workflow and our forward-leaning and our aspirational, and understanding what they have built already within their ecosystem that can be some of our first bridges. What are our low-hanging fruit bridges that we can take advantage of for as low a cost as possible? Because part of my entourage is our president here, and there's I got to bring value to the table before we can get to invest in some of these. But I think as we do that, we're going to get momentum and the ball rolling, and that's going to spiral into kind of that's the hope anyway. And so that's kind of how we're trying to approach that, is creating these workflows and then hunting for bridges. And we believe we found some really good partners, one in particular, to start building those bridges. And we're in process of that now.
Have your team members and colleagues embraced AI as much as you found they embraced the spatial tech that we talked about before?
I think, and we go back to the skeptic comment earlier, I think there's definitely embracement. The leadership of our company realizes that innovation, technology, and all of this is our future. But I think also they're kind of establishing a path that I need to become a little bit more of a business plan writer and document this down, establish the steps and what our spend's going to be, and really define at a very detailed level how we're climbing into that, and show the proof in the pudding. But it is something where I have this kind of a phrase that I like to use is the further you are up the mountain, the harder it is to see through the cloud layer to know what's really operating on the ground plane to get things done in the world. And as you deal with different folks in leadership, sometimes they're not as connected to the minutia of how you're dealing with the interface of Revit models and families and all these things. And so there's some repetition on presentation and whatnot. But no, I think there's absolutely embracement. It's just a matter of making sure we're really smart and strategic about how we do it, which I embrace. I think that's what we really need to be doing. We need to be smart about how we do it. If we got to be tactical, because there's so much you could hit. There's so many different opportunities. You could just get lost chasing your tail forever almost and never get anywhere.
Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this episode. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service, and it's 100% online. With BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of over 30,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. To get started, you just answer a few questions about your needs and preferences in therapy. That way, BetterHelp can match you with the right therapist from their network. Then you can talk to your therapist however you feel comfortable, whether it's via text, chat, phone, or video call. You can message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you. If your therapist isn't the right fit for any reason, you can switch to a new therapist at no additional charge. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality you expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom-picked for you, more scheduling flexibility, and at a more affordable price. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/BTE. That's betterhelp.com/BTE.
At FedEx Office, we know running a business is a marathon, but sometimes every task feels like a sprint. Design the product catalog, pick up the new boxes, print the business cards, notarize the lease, put out 20 more yard signs. It's a lot. Luckily for you, FedEx Office is here to help turn your ideas into reality, so you can stop running yourself in circles and start concentrating on the important things, like deciding what's for lunch. Visit your nearest location or office.fedex.com to get started. FedEx Office.
Do you imagine the impact that AI will have on the way in which your firm does work will be on par with what 3D spatial tech has done to the way in which you work with your healthcare clients?
I think that the AI, the aspirational platform that we're moving forward to, in my fantasies in terms of where I think we could be in 5 to 7 years, what we do today would almost be unrecognizable.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's exciting. So, you're obviously thinking about this in big ways. How's it changing the way that you're thinking about the talent? I mean, let's start with inside the firm. There's a lot of, reskilling and talent identification, I'm sure, that's happening. So maybe you can start there.
And that's a complicated question. I think there's so much going on relative to the generational shift. In a big picture, you've got, the boomers who are moving into retirement and millennials and Gen Z coming in. And then you have this smaller generation of Gen X, which I'm one of, are trying to hold up, the middle, and we're just being crushed. So there's a gap. There's not enough Xers in the world because Xers rock. But what
they've watched Star Wars things. Yeah.
we grew up on Star Wars. Thank you. It paved this path. But I think what we're finding is that as you start looking at this workflow, where traditionally architecture has been kind of a mentorship process, and you learn by doing and by being saved from mistakes by your mentors or by making mistakes, and you're building all the different components of a document set as you move forward in your career, and you over time develop more and more expertise from that experience and lessons learned. And now we're going to be going into situations where you're going to be conceptualize something with a younger group of people, because you're losing that historical knowledge out the door to the golf courses, right? And they're not going to have that opportunity to kind of grow on the job, and we're going to put it through these AI tools. And the AI tools right now, as you're working with, a lot of them they're in their infancy. Like, people talk about all this capability, and I'm hoping that 5 to 7 years is a realistic window. People say it's coming in the next 15 minutes, but it's not. There's a lot to build. And a lot of these early iterations, especially as you dive into it, the product that comes out is nowhere near what a human could do. And so the humans have to go in and proofread it. So that skill of QA, QC is going to be much more in demand of people who are like midway or further into their career, have that technical expertise, have that programming and planning expertise to be able to correct those items where we don't have that coming out now. So we're trying to use big data to solve that to some degree, so we can start embedding a lot of information, capturing information before tea time. Not tea, but
tea. No,
tea and off. I'm using like my hands, and this is a podcast. But
you're getting everyone out on the golf course. We're with you, yeah.
But I think as you think about, the younger people are coming in. You need digital learners. We want people to be more client facing, I think. So or you could have a lot of people in old school who might be a little more introverted. I think we might have a lot more client facing people this process has shifted a lot of our younger staff into those positions because they're building all the components and they're driving the model during the meeting, which is incredible because it really fast forwards their career because they're hearing the details that are driving the conversation, the urgency from the client, where before we couldn't afford to bring them to the meeting. So a PM goes to a meeting, he's doing his song and dance, trying to take minutes, comes back, gives them 60% of the information, gets angry at them, in 2 weeks because he hasn't talked to them and it doesn't have, even 40% of it in there, and they're angry at their PM. But now they're in the room and we found they started doing a lot of it, almost all of it, in real time so now you leave that meeting and you're ready for the next meeting instead of coming back and having that miscommunication. So it is augmenting their learning curve dramatically. And so we're trying to find people that just really work well as a team. Like team is such a big part of our ethos and our culture. We're like a work family and that's who we are.
I think the other thing that I heard through those words and when you weren't talking about golf was storytelling.
Yeah.
And that you are really using these tools to tell a better story and to even immerse your clients in the story of the design that you're creating for them. Can you talk about like how you're thinking about and honing that and maybe how the tool is helping to really humanize? Like, because I feel like that's such a barrier when people think abstractly about quote unquote the metaverse. This is actually you telling the story of your firm in a different way and actually being, to your point, more client facing and more interactive with them.
Right. So I think there's a few levels to that. One, there's the story we tell when we're meeting with clients to let them understand what the platform is. So we've kind of curated a story similar to the one I told, with the demo that we did prior, that helps them understand the benefits that are there, right? So that's one level of story. But the other, which is probably more what you're getting at, is instead of looking at a checklist of items that are in a room on a floor plan and an elevation and make sure they're placed properly, we're really having dialogue about practice and how that space is utilized. And when we talk about relationships of a nurse station to, the pre-post beds and the view that you have and how quickly you can get over there, like we're now having discussions and storytelling about their daily work and how they operate. Mm-hmm. We have a whole nother thing I haven't even shared with you guys, which is like I don't even know how to describe it. It's a strategically lower acuity mock-up with an AR overlay. Mm-hmm. And so it's the same kind of thing where you're able to build a lower acuity room and we get the core components in the room and then we overlay that with QR codes to an AR so you can see everything that's actually there. And then the practitioners are in the same thing. They're working through their life and their storytelling of their day-to-day. So it's a different way of interacting with them while they're doing all this. And then because it's a lower acuity space, it's easier to reconfigure and kind of get right on those bigger moves or adjust the model without delaying your project or having to order all these different components to get them in the room. And so it's a much less expensive way to accelerate your project and connect them to that story of how they operate and work.
So Keith, you mentioned a couple of times a demo that Andrew, Tess, and I were lucky enough to see right before we went on air, as they say in the biz. And I'm hoping that you could give like a quick kind of audio overview of what we saw, and I'll set the scene a little bit. So where you're at with when you're working with a client in an analog state is a client's looking at a floor plan and you're explaining the layout of the space. Basically, here's the upper left quadrant. Here's the room that we're walking you through from an architectural standpoint. The client says, "I'd like to move this desk over here," and what you've done is you've taken that experience and gamified it in some way. So can you kind of walk through how the client experience has changed from a reviewing a floor plan standpoint? And then you mentioned someone behind the scenes making live changes and how that works from a client perspective.
Yeah, I can give a bit of an overview.
Love it.
Of that. Basically, we use a gaming engine for visualization and we connect that to the Revit model in real time and we walk through it. And we've put a lot of energy into kind of our asset building and how we curate that and build that model. We keep a chat going in the background. We have people making modifications while they're doing it. So you have this experience from the client side. The first time we did it was with Dr. Kachatourian. So if I could tell that story, that's probably a better way to do it.
And
right?
I'm coming from a background long ago in television. Like you're talking about a television control room here, right? Like you're putting on a show.
Totally.
Right? And you've got a lot of tech going on in the background that's behind the curtain for your client.
Yeah, we're talking. We have a separate feed going. We're sharing screen captures. It's like, we're coordinating loading times. It's like, it's a whole thing. And we also, at that point, when we first did it for the surgery center, we had everyone cross-trained. Mm-hmm. So that no matter who was, settings were all identical, like everything. So if someone dropped, the other person could grab screen and the client wouldn't know the difference. They would just be like, oh, hold on. We just had a little blip. I have to go back to that room. That was it. But with Dr. Khatchatorian, we were working on this was the first project where the contractor wanted us to pull the building into VR. And thankfully, he convinced me to do that because we actually had another groundbreaking moment with that. So we're at a OAC meeting, owner, architect, contractor, during construction, in the construction trailer, like 7 a.m. And we're in the middle of framing of the project. And all of a sudden, Dr. Khatchatorian runs in there in a panic. And he's like, oh my God. He's like, we've got a problem. He goes, we designed our procedure suite for overflow for an exam room, and we've got all these monitors in there that are for the patient. And he goes, but we just got this new suite of software that I need to use that's going to be like so cool, but I need to see it while I'm doing procedures. And now that monitor's behind me. And so we basically took our model to the trailer in a laptop, because this is, like 8 years ago, so we weren't in the cloud yet. And we said, hey, Catch, don't worry, we got this, right? Although I'm not supposed to call him that.
I was like, that's really cool.
Yeah, so he's awesome. He's like just one of the great doctors I've ever worked with, and really embraced the technology. And I said, listen, come back next week. We're going to bring a VR headset. We're going to put you in your room. We're going to fix it. He goes, what? I said, trust me. So he comes back the next week. We have the whole thing set up. We put him in the room. And we had, we had our medical planner in the room, and we had our code references, we had standards, we had everything we needed to make real-time decision-making in the construction trailer. And we had a monitor up so we could see what he was looking at. And he sat in the room, and he basically pantomimed doing his procedure. And we were moving the monitor. Try it over that wall. He goes, no, a little bit more to the right. Well, no, now you're in the clear space that we need for this, for infectious control. Oh, okay, yeah, I know. Well, but let's try it over. And we kind of worked out that room like within, half an hour, 40 minutes. We had everything adjusted. And then that was like midweek. I think we did our OACs on Tuesday for that project. So I think the next Monday we issued a corrective RFI that changed all the infrastructure and adjusted it before they even put sheetrock up.
Wow.
And so that was, that's kind of gives a good sense of we've extrapolated that now to whole building.
An incredible efficiency in the construction process.
Oh yeah. Well. Oh yeah, it's awesome. And our tools now we've found as we started to invest in building these assets that it just keeps giving gifts in terms of the leave behind we give to the client is at a completely different level, allows them to really engage the building in a very different way than they ever could. And the way we're coordinating with our consultants is completely different, and is in a visual platform that I was talking, we're just like doing it in the visual platform. And then we have a QA QC process that we do, kind of overlaying with the Clash model, where we've made modifications to specifications for subs and whatnot, so that we make sure that we have a fully rich model that overlays with what we're doing, and we're able to see connections and validate things at a level that we just never could before. And we're issuing, like little things that they're getting wrong in the field, we're able to let them know. We're doing a lot of visual capture of the construction process as well. And so we can sit in the comfort of our room and do site visits and correct everything and issue it in a single communication, and they fix it all before they put sheetrock up. So like all those things create just an enormous amount of waste in the regular industry. I read this statistic, it's like upwards of 30% of construction activity is attributed to waste. I think if you dig in deeper, it's probably averages more in like around 20 or just below. But still, if you have a $100 million project, you're burning $30 million. Like that's a lot of money to set fire to, right? So we're attacking that. And so what happens is as we're finding these corrections, these are things that would, they would delay the opening of your project because they would need to get fixed in the field, and it's out of sequence work, and it's more expensive as a change order. And now they're standing on your desks, and there's in-place damage, and I mean all the nightmares, and you're opening the building later. So all these things that contribute to waste and cost for the client, we're finding these tools are leveraging us to be able to head those off. And we're just getting better at it. I mean, we're just getting better.
Hard to go back to a floor plan if you're a client after going through this experience.
We've gotten feedback from some of our clients that they've gone, we spoil some of the users we're working with. We have great peer relationships, and we partner with a lot of our clients, and we work with some really great, talented people in the healthcare industry. But we kind of have a little bit of a differentiator here. And when we do a user meeting now on like a remodel in a department, and then that department has to go and they're on a leadership within that service area, they go to meet with another architect, and they're like, oh, how come we can't walk through it like we do with SLAM? And
where's the headset?
And we're not, and that's like they're saying that in front of the architect, and it's like, oh, I feel bad for them.
Doctors are always whining for their metaverses.
Yeah, right. Little do they realize, right? Yeah. Little do they realize. So and they're saying like, we can't do that, because it's taken a lot of work to figure out how to keep ourselves in the black on it. It's not easy, and a lot of people are looking at that just at face value, and they're going, not going down there, not yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Essentially, too, you're creating a ledger, for the long term on these projects too. So the legacy of a SLAM project is, the value of that by virtue of this process, I think yet to be discovered, obviously, but let's fast forward 10, 15, 20 years from now. I mean, we spoke about this before. You're doing any kind of renovation and you tear down a wall and historically it's like, oh, well, those pipes are not on the drawings. Where did those come from? Or electrical or whatever it may be. And you're sort of solving for that future problem too.
Yeah, we have a good example of that, actually. So this surgery center that we did the first building on that campus as well. So it's kind of like a slampus.
Is that a trademark thing that we're...
I think I'm going to have to call somebody afterwards. Yeah. Also, remember to slam your subscription button.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, shout out.
But so we and that was done in Revit. It wasn't done to this level of acuity, but it was not far off. And we're doing remodels in that building now. So we're actually developing a little campus, a Slampiverse.
Wait, that's another T-shirt.
I agree.
Yeah.
A Slampus? Or
yeah, we're always looking for merch.
Yeah.
Always
just
looking
trying
for
to brand
merch.
things,
I appreciate that.
You've got a great T-shirt on today that our audience can't see, but
yeah, no, I'm sporting the mark for sure.
You are.
Yeah.
So just sort of outside of your own firm, you've told us that you're a member of the AIA Large Firm CIO Design Technology Council, the Design Futures Council. You probably have some rules. There's a bit of a stonecutters thing there that we don't want to break through. But can you tell us, where some of the conversations are heading with groups like that and how you're playing a role in shaping the broader future for the industry?
Yeah, I was really happy you shared questions ahead of time because this took me a while to think about in terms of like
what can you say?
Yeah, what a value comes out of that. And there is a big message that I'm feeling is an undercurrent, and it's not hitting everywhere. But there's a lot of companies, and I'll use Apple as an example. And I have an iPhone, and I love my iPhone, and I'm very interested in getting a set of the new goggles when they come out. But the challenge there is they're really so focused on keeping you in their ecosystem, right? It's very like no, we're not going to play with others. And Autodesk has historically been very much that way. And there's a lot of other players in the space that are just like, no, it's all about our products, and we're going to create a product for everything and compete with everybody. And we're seeing the beginning of that conversation opening up with a recognition that the data's got to be able to transfer. Like it's a bigger universe, and you need to play nice in the sandbox. And there's been some requests and some tests of that are starting to come back with some positive feedback. And so, without getting too far down that rabbit hole, I think it's extremely encouraging because I think this world that we're discussing is so dependent. Its success is going to be predicated on the ability to manage and move between platforms and software and tools effectively. And that's something that I've noticed as a theme, right?
It's exciting to see. I mean, that's Web3 sort of influences driving with this idea of decentralization. And, even the new Threads app was built on a decentralized platform so the data could be ported. So it's exciting to hear that conversation's, happening at that level.
And I think there's another component of that too, is the verbiage I was using was referencing to data. And I think data is another conversation that is really permeating a lot of those organizations, as we mentioned. It's like looking at, there's references to some of the deregulation of the banking system, in Europe, and that by doing that and creating a shared data pool that still recognizes certain privacy barriers that are obviously required, that it created a multi-billion-dollar industry of products that were able to be leveraging that vast amount of data. Because there's so many financial products that were kind of siloed within their deal. And now that you can start to commingle that data, you get a much bigger understanding of that banking system. And so products have been developed to kind of take advantage of that. And I think, like Amazon has done that. And there's just a lot of different companies that are down that path that are huge disruptors. And I think there's a recognition that type of disruption, that every industry is vulnerable to that. And so there's desires to understand, like, okay, as an industry, how do we start, opening things up and communicating better and sharing data? And the hope is that a lot of that starts to push towards, sustainability, because it's just so direly needed there. It's just such an important cause.
What else do you have going on right now? As you know, we like to wrap up the podcast with some plugs. So plug and Greg's over here, so we know you need to nail it. So what's SLAM working on right now that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, well, I mean, one, like if you want to build a building, almost any building.
Slampus.
Yeah, we really got that number. And if you're someone who builds a lot of buildings, we can drive an incredible amount of efficiency there. If you're looking for a technical architect, you're looking for really good design, we're there. I think if you're looking for, maybe if you're not directly an architect, but you're in, because we learn a lot in collaborating with adjoining industries. And so I think innovation consultation is something we're definitely open for. There's something else that I was discussing with Emily a little while ago, our director of communications, that would involve, let's say, the art world. So if you know anyone who's connected to museums, I have a concept there that we're interested in exploring, but that's a little bit of a, off subject. But yeah, no, I think, we're here to build great architecture. Like, creativity and design to enrich lives is what SLAM is about. And so I think that's probably our primary plug.
Yeah,
Not golfing just yet.
No, I have a long time before my tee time. And I'm a horribly bad golfer.
All the more reason to
I'm
practice,
more of a scratch innovator. Than,
well done. Share some project photos with us. We'll put them in the show notes.
Absolutely. No, would love to be great. Speaking of show notes, I am so hungry for like a great depth. I was talking to Tessa just yesterday. Like, I'm a big fan of the podcast. I really never knew of the podcast until we connected, and our conversation was like so invigorating. I got so excited about it. You invited me out to the summit, and I went through everything. And so I'm a big fan of the podcast.
Love it. Love it. Good
plug.
Yeah. But the show notes, you have to get the show notes. Like, I've started myself because there's a structure. You get into origin stories, and people generally talk about some software that they're exploring or some innovations they've had. And so I'm thinking like almost like baseball cards, but a little bigger with some nice graphics, because you guys have that at your disposal. Yeah. Where you can go in and maybe put some meta tags in there. So if I want to talk about like, hey, who's someone who's working in big data, maybe like 4 different people have been on your podcast come up, and you have links to the podcast, and you can go and look at links to the softwares that they're investigating. Like very quickly you could come into like because I think this is one of the best places to really explore technology as an entry point, not a barrier, right? It's really more like opening the doors to all these just phenomenally creative people who are powerfully moving the needle right now, and they're fantastic speakers and inspiring, and they're sharing a lot of the software and things that they're digging into. And so for me, like, there's so much to explore. This is a nice way to start. I really think so.
Cool.
Endorsed by Keith Fine. Barriers to entry. Yeah. Well, we always end each pod asking the same question of our guests, and that's, what advice would you give or a resource that you would share for our listeners out there?
You can say the pod again.
Yeah, I was going to say, like,
I
think we're out of order on questions. I think that was my answer for that one. The other thing, I guess, on the plugs was I had a non-plug to kind of reach back to the previous podcast where Carly was here. And, if you're an architect out there and you're digging into AI and you're digging into these technologies and automating these things and looking at visualization, I'd say, really just don't worry about it. Like, we got it. Go along your way, and we'll meet up in a couple years, and we'll have some products you can use. It'll be fantastic.
Love it. Well, this is amazing. It was so cool to hear about your journey and just to understand, even since the first time we spoke, how much some of these ideas and have firmed up and pushed forward. So we're really looking forward to following where all SLAM goes and seeing the Slampuses of the future. But thanks so much for coming down and joining us in the Vornado podcast compound today.
It was really a pleasure and an honor to be here. It's great to meet you guys in the chat. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Keith.
Well, if that was not an interesting conversation and a call out to our industry to kind of take a look in the mirror, take a look at what your organization is doing, take stock of how far you've come from an innovation perspective after everything you've learned from Keith, I think now is the time, for the industry to start to think, what are the ways that we can use some of these tools just to think outside the box to enhance client experience, maybe to create efficiencies. I'd love to hear what you thought about that, Bobby, about efficiencies.
Couple of things. I mean, for one, I wouldn't want to be the firm that's working with a client that just worked with Keith and his team and got to either throw on the headset for the 5% of clients that might be throwing on the headset, or experience that, immersive walkthrough of a space on a laptop screen and get the question, hey, where's my gaming experience? That's tough. And if you're a firm that's, in the competitor set with SLAM, that's one of those things where that becomes client expectation. It's just like Amazon disrupted the direct-to-consumer e-com industry however many years ago with 2-day and now overnight shipping. And that's the expectation when you're dealing with the direct-to-consumer business. And the client experience is going to change when they're dealing with firms going forward because of innovators like Keith and his team at SLAM. It's become a cliche at this point to talk about the ways in which disruption was accelerated by COVID. But what Keith and his team did in the story he told at the very start of COVID, getting a phone call and saying, you're going to have 1 day to meet with this team of doctors because of the way in which this hospital is going to be repurposed in consideration of the patients they're going to be contending with at the start of this pandemic. And they brought it together, leveraging technology. Sometimes a disruption is the thing that hastens the need to evolve your workflows, evolve the way in which you tackle a client experience. We had conversations at Perspectives with individuals who were asking Andrew and Tess and I, how do I get started with using technologies? And you just have to start. And sometimes there's an impetus for that start. I don't think that certainly wasn't the first time Keith was innovating, but it caused a major leap forward in terms of the way in which Slam handled its client experience. That was impressive to hear. And I think it really jump-started some really exciting ways in which Slam works with its clients. And like I said just a minute ago, and like you said at the start, Tess, it's a call to action now for other design firms that work with the same clients that Slam works with to take a major step forward as well.
I think the big thing in that, and we've heard this from guest after guest after guest on the pod, you just have to start, but it's really great and validating to hear a story of, like Keith's, where they did have to start. There was that inciting moment. Necessity is the mother of invention, but they didn't stop, is the other piece. You know, they're thinking about, and I mean, this was the big theme of our panel with Aaron and Matthias is, you know, now that we're on this train, we're going to keep going, and we're going to think about how our organization continues to build that muscle and how innovation continues to be a part of what we do on a day-to-day basis. Because, you know, when you start to get some of that lead and you start to get out in front, you don't want to fall back to the pack is the other piece as well. And I think that's, you know, really the challenge that Keith was teasing for us at the end as well. And it was even really cool to hear about the way their product is now informing later parts of the process around the efficiencies of construction.
Mm-hmm. One of the greatest efficiencies that Keith was talking about that I think speaks to cost savings today, Keith talked about the 30% of construction costs go to waste and how they can use this technology to, you know, save those costs and save those funds, but also sort of thinking ahead where this technology is going to lead us when we go further. And, you know, one of the really interesting things that we spoke about was how we can use this planning process and essentially recreating these physical spaces as a digital twin, almost as a future preventative and liability issue too. So you're offering, when you're a firm, you're offering your client the insurance of a great and efficient product today and thinking about the benefits of that product in the future.
Yeah, there's just so much potential for what 3D can do when you put it into a real ecosystem of thought and product.
The thing I wanted to point out was Keith was confident about what he and his team are building over there. Even when we asked him about AI and what he and the Slam team have up their sleeves moving forward, obviously he wasn't ready to talk about it yet, but Keith was like, that's going to blow what we're doing right now out of the water. First of all, I admire the confidence, but I'd also take that as kind of a call to action to say, okay, I got to figure out what my strategy is going to be as it relates to leveraging AI, embedding, Andrew, if I may, embedding AI within my organization, because folks have roadmaps built out, whether it's on the design firm side or the product manufacturing side. We're thinking about right now across the industry ways in which these tools and technologies will make our design process more efficient, ways in which we will make the client experience more pleasurable. And if we're kind of just sitting on our hands and a little bit afraid to get out of the starting gates, you're going to find that you're going to fall behind and you're going to lose out on project opportunities and you're going to disappoint clients.
So much to take away from there, and hopefully a conversation that's leaving our listeners, whether they were at the Perspective Conference or not, feeling inspired and feeling like they're already getting excited to tune into the next episode of Barriers to Entry. Wouldn't you say, Tess?
I would say so. We want to give a big thank you to the Barriers to Entry production team, Wise Grisette, Sam Sager, and everyone else back at the Studio by Sandow Podcave. Barriers to Entry is part of the Surround Podcast Network. Make sure you go to surroundpodcast.com, and that is podcast with an S. And then we want you to smash, but this time we want you to slam the follow button.
Nailed it, Tess. Nailed it.
Thank you. Join us next time as we continue to break down the barriers to entry.
And of course, may the force be with all of you.
Oh, God. You waited for that one, I'm sure.